Thanks for joining our edWebinar today, Resolving Tough Individual Student Behavior Challenges with Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. I'm Kayla Hampton with Brooks Publishing. We're a proud sponsor of today's webinar, and this is Dr. Rose Iovannone. She will be presenting today. Let me just do a brief overview before we get started. Like all of our edWebinars, we'll be offering CE certificate at the end of this live. You'll be emailed within 24 hours. If you're not watching this live, you're watching on demand, it will be sent to you after you take the quiz. Don't forget to join our free edWeb community, teaching all students practical strategies for inclusive classrooms. And as always, we're doing a special offer with today's webinar. Use code edWebRI, and you'll get to save 20% at our website, brookspublishing.com. Offer is still good until November 30th. And we're going to be doing a giveaway today. We're going to give away 3 free copies of Prevent, Teach, Reinforce 2nd edition. Be active in the chat, and we'll be picking people randomly, and I'll announce it at the end before we do the Q&A. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Rose Iovannone. She's assistant professor at the University of South Florida. She's currently the director of the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce project, and she also serves as the co-principal investigator on the University of South Florida's subcontract for the Professional Development in Autism project funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, and as assistant director of the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities at University of South Florida. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, hi everyone. It's great to have all of you here. We're going to talk about, in a brief time, the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce process. As you can see here, the agenda. First, I'm going to start with an overview, and then we're going to describe the steps. We're going to use a case study. For those of you who are joining from a phone, I'll try to remember that you're on the phone, and when we get to videos and stuff, you'll be able to hear the video, you just won't be able to see it. But the video's audio is quite good, so I think you'll be fine with that. Without any further time with this, we're going to go ahead and get started and get right into it. These are just what, by the end of the hour, you should be able to describe the process and then identify maybe some things that made PTR successful over a traditional process. So we're going to take a poll first. So what I'd like to know is, who is here? How many of you are teachers, administrators, school psychologists, or behavior analysts, or some sort of support system, family members, or some other? And you can respond in the chat what's your other if you don't think you fit into those 4 categories. So we get a sense of who all is here today. And we see that most of you are teachers, although we have a little bit of everyone here. So I'm glad to know that we have a lot of teachers. And I'll try to talk about this also, how a teacher's role would look like in PTR. So let's first talk about what is Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, or PTR as we're going to call it from now on. It was a research project that was funded in 2005, actually. So it's been quite some time that we've had PTR. It was funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and specifically the Institute of Education Sciences, the research branch of the Department of Education. And the whole purpose of us doing PTR was to evaluate the functional behavior assessment, behavior intervention approach compared to what's typically done in schools and the outcomes on those students. This was one of the first rigorous research studies that was out there, and it still is, we believe, the only randomized control trial that looked at the effectiveness of our FBA-BIP approach compared to the absence of Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, or PTR. Some of the goals of PTR that you will see as you're looking at things is we want to make the tools that we use throughout this process very teacher-friendly, school-friendly. So you're not going to see the jargon and some of the stuff you might see on other approaches. We wanted these to be useful. We also see through PTR is we use a collaborative approach. So when we talk about the team, you're going to see who are the team members and how we work as teams together. We also, because it's a team, we do have ways built in that are going to be able to help teams reach agreement or consensus on decisions. And then PTR also is designed for coaches, school psychologists, behavior analysts, or specialists, or others to support the teacher in implementing interventions and provide feedback and continue to make good progress monitoring decisions. For those of you who are doing multi-tiered system of supports or response to intervention and you're using a multi-tiered model, and most of you probably are very familiar with the triangle, Prevent, Teach, Reinforce is considered a Tier 3 support. So because it's a Tier 3 support, that means it requires more resources. And the resource primarily that's required in PTR is the resource of time. This is not something you can do just 1 hour. It is something that would take you a bit more time to do. Okay, so the model of PTR is we first start with the team, and the team consists of 3 levels of knowledge. There should be a coach or somebody who really understands functional behavior assessment, behavior intervention plans, the behavioral principles, and knows how to work with the team to collaborate and guide them to make decisions throughout the process. We also then need somebody who knows the student well, the student who is having the problem behaviors that you wish to develop an intervention. And that would typically be teachers, parents, and other educators who work with the student and are familiar with and have seen the behaviors. Then we need somebody who understands the community, the school, how to get resources, how to support the staff. This could be an administrator, could sometimes be the person who's the coach. So we don't require a certain number of people to be on the team, but there has to be more than one, of course, at least at a minimum, the coach and a teacher, someone who knows the student well. And then we go through the steps of the model. And we start with step 1 up there on the left. For those of you that are on the phone, hopefully you can download the PowerPoint. We have a kind of a circle where we just describe the steps. And I'm going to take you through an explanation of each step. This is just an overview. In step 1, we identify and define the behaviors of interest. So we're going to define and identify behaviors we want to see less of from the student, and then behaviors we prefer to see instead of that problem behavior from the student. We'll define those, and then we'll set up a very easy progress monitoring system. So those are the 2 goals for step 1. For step 2, what we're going to get input from all the team members on what might be happening related to that behavior. So that's the functional behavior assessment part. For those of you who are familiar with that, you would be answering questions about what's happening in the classroom or in the hallway or wherever the behavior is happening. What happens right before the behavior occurs so that we can understand what might be triggering it. And then what happens right after the behavior occurs? What do teachers do? What do other adults do? What do kids do, or peers, or friends, or not so great friends do? What are the responses? Based on all of this information, we can then develop what we call a hypothesis, which really just describes what is the relation of some of those environmental events to the behavior, so we understand why the student is doing the behavior, what the student's getting out of it, what the function is, as well as what's triggering it. Based on that hypothesis, we then move into step 3 with the team to identify and select behavior interventions that will prevent the problem behavior from happening, teach a new skill, which is what you identified in step 1 usually, of what you want to see the student do instead of the problem behavior, and then reinforce them so that they're able to get their function or outcome with their new skill instead of their problem behavior. And then also we talk in that step about what we're going to do now if the student does do a problem behavior. What do we do instead? How do we respond? Within this step, we provide coaching support. We not only coach the teacher on how to do the plan, we then provide support after the plan is implemented to give feedback and to continue to hopefully make good decisions for what to do next. In step 4, we reconvene the big team, there is more than just the teacher, to review the data, both the fidelity data, how well the teacher implemented the plan, and the student outcome data, and then make some next step decisions. And we may continue to go around this cyclical process until behavior is improved to the point where maybe they don't need individualized supports any longer. So real quick, research support for PTR. There have been 2 randomized controlled trials so far. the original one that is the book is based upon, in which we tested this out in real schools with kids between kindergarten and grade 8, so 5 years to about 14 years of age. There's also another study that was done for 3 to 5 year olds, so for young children. I know there is a book for PTR young children. We are trying to do it in high school. We're hoping that we get funded to do this and test it out with a controlled research in high schools and middle schools. However, we know it's already being done because a lot of people throughout the United States and internationally actually are using PTR, and we know they're already using it in high schools. There's been a lot of single subject studies in a lot of different settings. So we've done research, or other people have done research on using PTR with students in general education, just students with autism. We've even had a study done in a daycare or a childcare setting, training daycare center people to work with a couple of students or children that are in their centers. We've trained families to do this. And we've had a recent study in which one of our students did this with 3 high school students who had emotional disturbance, or EBD, emotional behavior disabilities, in a high school. And all of the research that has happened, the students who get PTR do improve in their academic engagement. They decrease the problem behaviors that they had, as well as increase the appropriate behaviors. And we also, in our randomized controlled trial, saw increases in social skills. In those single subject design, whatever they were measuring improved. So what they wanted to go down went down, the problem behavior. What they wanted to see go up went up. We also usually do social validity and fidelity. In all of these studies, teachers are implementing their plans with very high fidelity, which means they're doing it accurately and they're doing it well. And then we also often ask teachers and students after PTR, did they like it? Did they think it was easy to do? Would they be willing to do it again? Would they be willing to tell other people that this is something they should do? And so they give it very high validity, which means it's very important, especially if you're a teacher. You know, if you don't like doing something, you're not going to do it again. So now we're going to go ahead and do the PTR process. If you have any questions for research, you'll have to email me or something, because I decided not to dwell a lot of time in research because we'll go right into it. We only have an hour. So we usually use this when I do presentations at conferences for teaming. So the first thing you want to learn about PTR is it is a team process. Even if it's only a team of 2, it's a team process. Usually what we do with this, what you're seeing right now, for those of you on the phone, there's a picture, a slide of a kind of drawing that has a ton of different size boxes within this big square. And usually what we ask people to do is, first on your own, try to count the squares and see how many squares you can find in this picture. After we give a minute to people doing it by themselves, we then get, how many squares do people find? And then we ask them to do it with a team instead. So they form teams and they come to consensus on how many squares there are. In almost all cases, 100%, as a team, people find more squares than they do independently. This is an illustration of the teaming process allows people to have different perspectives, different opinions, different ways of viewing issues. And that's what makes PTR very, I think, kind of robust, is because we have a team process. So the first thing the team does in step 1 is we're going to identify the problem. What is the behavior we want to see less of? What is the behavior we want to see more of? And let's get a teacher-friendly measurement system so we can start keeping data on this. So in this process, we do a very collaborative process. The goal of PTR is to get input from every single team member. So if there's a large team, so we have a team with a teacher, a school psychologist, maybe the paraprofessional, paraeducator, the parent, maybe a couple of other teachers who are also interested, we're going to have maybe 4 or 5 people or more in this team. So instead of having people, just one person pop up and say, this is the behavior we want to see less of, or having the principal say, this is the behavior that we get all the referrals on, we instead use a process such as a round robin process, where we may ask everyone, on their piece of paper or their form that we give to them, identify 1 to 3 behaviors they want to see less of from the student. We then go around in the group and have everybody tell us what is a behavior they wrote down. We list them, and then we start going through that whole list and saying which ones are the same, which ones are different. Let's define them. Now that we have everybody's input on what are the behaviors we want to see less of from the student, which behavior, if we could reduce it, would make everybody's day a better day every day. And so we have people vote for what that behavior that would be, and then we get consensus on whichever behavior seemed to get the most hits or the most votes. Is everybody okay to move ahead with that behavior? One of the reasons we do that is because the PTR process is to me an FBA BIP process in the way it was intended. It takes a little bit of time, and so each behavior that's identified, if we wanted to do more than one behavior, focus on more than one, we could do that. It would take more time because we would want to look at each behavior separately. We would want to do a functional behavior assessment on each problem behavior because they may have different functions. There may be different things going on in the classroom when one behavior happens as opposed to a different behavior. So we want to be able to sort that out by looking at them separately, which is why we try to get people to first prioritize one behavior and to start off with the one that would make every day a better day. Then once we get that problem behavior agreed upon, defined really well, we then ask the team to do the same thing by saying what would they want to see the student do instead of that problem behavior. And they'll each go around in a round robin. They'll tell us behaviors. We will define them, sort them out, and then say which behavior or behaviors do you want to concentrate on to teach the student instead of the problem behavior. Once we have those behaviors selected, and these are the forms that we use. So you can see it's a pretty simple form. This is one we give out to the team as well as usually the coach. If it's a big team, will project this on an LCD or some sort of projector and write in it so that the team can see exactly what's happening and what people are saying at the same time. So for those of you on the phone, we have a form. It's just a table with a couple of rows, and on the left side it says target behavior. The right side says definition. The categories are top is behaviors that we want to see decrease and behaviors we want to see increase. It's a very simple form. Once we have that, we're then able to then move into progress monitoring. Now, what I'm going to do to help you understand the process a little is to show you one case that went through the whole process, so you kind of get an idea of what PTR looks like from a team perspective as well as what it did for a student. So in this case study that we're going to show you is we have Mike. That's what we call him, Mike. He, during the time of the video, was 9 years old. He has autism, so even if you don't see it because you're on the phone, you will be able to tell probably really soon after we start this video that, yeah, I would guess he has autism. He is in a self-contained classroom. There are 6 students total in his classroom and 3 adults. The 3 adults is the teacher and 2 paraeducators. Mike is nonverbal. That doesn't mean he doesn't have sound, though. He has lots of sounds. He does use signs. So I do apologize for anyone on the phone. You won't see him when he's doing some signing. He also has PECs or picture symbols that he uses as well. So he has a combination. So I'm sure some of you know a person like Mike. I've had a Mike in your classroom, somebody like him. So this is the team's goal setting sheet. They had 4 behaviors that they identified in the round robin: screaming, hitting, getting out of his seat, and bossing his peers were what they identified they wanted to see Mike do less of. They decided that the screaming and the hitting were the behaviors that if they could reduce those 2 behaviors, it would make every day a better day. So they did decide to do 2. One of the reasons they decided to do 2 is because the hitting, they said, typically only happened when his screaming didn't stop. And if he escalated to what you saw or heard in the video, he would then resort to hitting and both adults and peers. So you can see how they define those loud, high-pitched noise, and you all experience that loud, high-pitched noise that you could hear the volume outside the classroom, whereas hitting was touching peers or adults with an open hand, fist, foot, or object while screaming. So you saw mainly doing the hand during that video. The behaviors they wanted to see more of for Mike are at the bottom there on the left. They came up with 4 behaviors, and they chose transition from preferred to non-preferred activities because that's a very desired teacher pleasing and very valid behavior that everyone needs to learn, how to move from one activity that they like to a behavior they don't like without screaming. And then they also understood that Mike was nonverbal, and Mike did have some communication issues. So they also said they'd like him to be able to say what he was feeling, that he could tell his feelings, or say, I need a break, or I need you to pay attention to me, instead of screaming. How they define transitioning from preferred to non-preferred activities is moving to non-preferred activity and engaging in communication at an inside voice, volume, and pitch. The other 2 behaviors they thought of was ask for a break or attention and initiate peer interactions using communication instead of hitting. But they chose the transition and the expressing frustration as the 2 behaviors they wanted to focus on to replace screaming and hitting. So from there, we then do what we call the I-BURST. It stands for Individualized Behavior Rating Scale Tool, and the acronym is I-BURST. It is a progress monitoring system that is very easy for teachers to use. So instead of teachers having to count every time a student does a behavior or frequency or event recording, or even interval recording, like how many did they do within 10 seconds. If they did it one time, doesn't matter how many, we're just going to say it happened. Or duration recording, which is timing how long behaviors happen. We wanted to do something that was much simpler and feasible for teachers. So we're doing something that's very similar to if you're doing check-in, check-out, or using daily report cards or something in a school-wide PBS system, that we wanted to convert that to something we could use in individualized behavior scales. So we're going to show you an example. This is the blank form in the book. So it looks like, well, it looks kind of complicated to me, but we're going to show you an example of Mike's team to kind of explain it. So let's look at the screaming, which is the very top row. So what we do is the coach guides the teacher and the team to develop this, so it's going to be useful for them. The scale is a 5-point Likert scale. For problem behaviors, the 5 means a really challenging day for that behavior. It was the day, I always kind of tease people and say it's the day that you consider that maybe you want to quit your job and become a Walmart greeter instead of staying in teaching position, because the behavior that day was really, made you go home with a headache. The 1 on this scale means a fantastic day. So it's the goal. And then in between, we have a 2, which is a good day, a 3, which is a so-so day, not bad, but not yet good, and a 4 is a typical bad day. So that's how those anchors or those measurements are. Those are the meanings they have. So no matter what problem behavior you have, those measurements mean the same thing, which helps in consistency if you're a coach and you're looking at several I-BURSTs across different teachers and different students. For Mike, for screaming, the first thing we ask the teacher is, over what period of time do you want to estimate? And we explain this is an estimation because they're going to estimate, and this is more of a perceptual scale as opposed to they have to have the exact numbers. So over what part of the day do you want to estimate screaming? Do you want to do the whole day and just record something at the end of the day? Do you want to look at a specific routine, a specific activity, a specific time? This teacher and team said, we want to measure screaming over the whole day because he screams over the entire day. So we went with that. The second thing we asked then is, if we're going to go over the whole day, what's going to be the easiest way for you to estimate his screaming? By about how many episodes of screaming he has, or times, how long those screaming events lasted, or how maybe what intensity what the top of the cycle that he reached. Like he got into screaming and high intensity or got to hitting. They said it would be easier for them to kind of estimate about how many screaming episodes he had over the course of a day. So that videotape that you either heard or saw would be considered one episode. So then once we know, okay, now it's going to be screaming by episodes over the entire day, we usually start with the 4, which means a typical bad day. And what I would say to that teacher is, think back over the last month or 2 on a typical bad day about how many screaming episodes this might have. This team said 7 to 8 episodes a day would probably be a typical bad day. Now, is that true? I don't know. We just have them discuss it and we put it down for them. Then the 5 then is very easy to set because it means a really challenging day or a really bad day for everyone. And so that has to be more than the top of 4. So they said 7 to 8 times for a 4. So 9 or more times must be that day you want to be the Walmart greeter. Usually they'll say, yes, that's correct. And then we ask them to set the 1 next. And this is in the book also on exactly how to set this up. So for a 1, which is a fantastic day, what would be a fantastic day for screaming episodes for Mike? And this team said if he screamed 2 or less times, they would think it would be fantastic because they know he doesn't have some good communication system yet. So we know this is communication. Then they said the 2 is 3 to 4 times, and which is the good day, and a so-so day is 5 to 6 times. Now, what we do now is test this out. And so we'll ask the teacher, depending on what time the meeting is, if it's at the end of the day, we'll say, was Mike here today? If so, how would you rate his screaming today? Was it the worst day ever, the best day ever, a good day, a typical bad day, or a so-so day? And almost all teachers will be able to circle the rating almost instantly and say, this is what I'd give him and this is why. So I'm not going to go over the other ones because we don't have enough time. Just to note that the last 2 rows, which are those target behaviors they wanted to see more of, expressing frustration and transitioning to non-preferred, we flip the scale so that a 5 is no longer the worst day ever, the Walmart greeter day. The 5 is the fantastic day. That's because you can graph this. And usually we want to see problem behaviors, the line go down in the graph so that we see less of that. And for the behaviors that we want to teach him to do instead, we want to see those increase. So you'll see the line go up instead. If you have questions about that, we'll be able to talk about that when this is over. At the bottom of the iBurst, we always have the key. What are the behaviors, their definitions, and directions over when are we doing this, over what time period, and what do these really mean? So that anybody going in could actually do that. Now, is this a reliable instrument? Some people who might be behavior analysts, and I'm a board certified behavior analyst, I definitely understand when this was first introduced to us, when we developed it, we're not too sure about this. We now all love the iBurst. And we've done some research that's been published. It is reliable. 2 different people who are using the iBurst to score the same behavior come up very close in their ratings. So we have coefficients in our research from 0.65 to 0.82, all considered adequate. We also know that there is some validity to it, which means that was what the teachers circle actually what happens in the classrooms is they're kind of estimating. We had one student who actually did a study in which she observed and counted, did an actual direct observation, and then matched the direct observation to what the teacher circled for the rating, and found that they are almost at least 75% of the time in exact agreement, and a big other part of the time only 1 point off. So her coefficient was 70, which is considered very good. So now we move into step 2. Now that we know the behaviors we want to see less of, and for Mike, remember they're screaming and hitting, we now want to answer some questions about when did these behaviors happen and why do they happen. So in our big presentations, we usually try to get people thinking about functional behavior assessment by asking them to use 4 straight lines to connect all of the dots without lifting your pencil. Most people can't seem to do it. And I can't remember if I put the answer or not, but you have to go out of the box in order to use 4 straight lines. So that first line across, you, instead of stopping at the 3rd dot, you would go out, take your line, extend out, past that 3rd dot, then bring it down to get into that column 3, the 2nd row of the dots. You go down and connect those 2. And you have to still go out of the box So the point of that is, in order to use only 4 straight lines to connect those dots, you have to go out of the box. And in functional behavior assessment, we don't consider the child is a problem. It's instead the child has behavior problems, and there's something without inside of the box in the environment that are impacting when this behavior happens and what happens afterwards. So what we do in PTR is we have checklists. They are to be given to each person on the team who knows the child well enough that they can answer the questions. And there's 3 sections of our functional behavior assessment checklist. There's a section that asks about what can we do to prevent the problem behavior. So all the questions are about what's happening right before the problem behaviors occur. What are the activities? What are the circumstances? Who are the people who are around at that time? Is there something happening outside of the classroom that might impact the behaviors? Like, maybe when the child comes in on days they feel ill, or maybe when they have had a fight. Older kids, they've had a fight with their girlfriend or boyfriend. Then the second part is, what do the teachers and the team members think might be the function of that student's problem behavior? Do they think it's to escape or avoid or delay people, get away from people, or delay or avoid a transition, or avoid a non-preferred activity? Or do they think it's to get something, get a preferred activity, get access to a person, or get access to some sensory input? And then we ask about what happens after the behavior, which is the reinforced section. So what happens immediately after the behavior occurs? What do others do? And what kind of things other than the function would the student like to be rewarded with? So the coach summarizes the information on what we call the assessment summary table and brings a draft hypothesis back to the team. The coach also should do a direct observation as well to help guide the team, and the team then comes together to reach consensus on the hypothesis. So for Mike, this here is example. Sorry, it's kind of small. I want to take screenshots of the PTR FBA checklist. So you can see it's a 5-page thing. These are talking about each of the pages. So the teacher has forced choice. It can be used as an interview as well if people prefer the interviews. This is a sample of our assessment summary table, the blank ones. At the top, we record all the information, because remember, we're getting independent information from each person so that we can have those different perspectives. And then what we're going to do is pay attention to things that are agreed upon or listed by more than one person, because those are probably things that'll be a little more valid. And then we come up with a draft hypothesis. So we also have what we call a helper sheet. We also call it a cheat sheet that guides the coach or whoever's doing PTR on what to put in each box. So they look at their PTR assessment, and it tells them which items on the PTR assessment from prevent data go into the first box, which go into the second box, which goes into the third box. So it helps them out and guides them. So if we go back to Mike, our little guy who has autism and screams and hits a whole lot, this is what was put on the assessment summary table. So if when screaming and hitting occurs, most often these are 3 team members. Remember, it is the teacher and the 2 teacher assistants. I did see that some people weren't familiar with the term paraeducators. So teacher assistants, aides, other people who support the teacher and the students in the classroom. They said that this happens most often when he's given something he doesn't like to do. Isn't that a surprise? A lot of our kids tend to have problem behaviors when they're asked to do something they don't like to do. And they specifically said it happens most often when he's asked to join the group in reading and math. It happens when teachers attend to others. It happens when other kids are upset or mad. It also happens during transitions, particularly if he has to leave something he likes to something he doesn't like. When he's told not, he can't have something like those Skittles, and told no, that results in screams. Now, what did they think was the purpose of that behavior, screaming and hitting? They thought primarily it was to get attention, and secondarily to get a brief delay. Now, this was their first thought. Their second, we did have to work, do a plan that didn't work for about a week or so, because we went ahead with the team's consensus on they thought it was more for attention, when we really found out that he really wanted to first avoid or delay a transition or the non-preferred activity. And while he was delaying, he was getting lots of attention. So the behavior plan example that you'll see for Mike looks at the function of escape instead. And then what do they typically do after he does problem behavior? Well, they do give him a lot of attention, which is what gave them the thought that he was having a attention function, is they do a lot of redirections. You heard that. A lot of reprimands. Stop doing that. You need to do this. And we didn't see this, but they sometimes calm and soothe him to get him to stop screaming. They also give him personal space. For those of you that didn't see it, he was taken to a think chair, which is a chair in the classroom that's in another kind of away from all the other kids, where he is supposed to think about the behaviors that he did and then get calmed down. But they said they wanted to tell me that he always has to complete that task. So don't, we don't really buy that it's all escape at this point. They also say sometimes they take away the smiley faces and he doesn't get to go to the treasure chest, or he's told he can't do the treasure chest because he lost a smiley face. So we also in PTR and the functional assessments try to find the positive and the strength-based things. So we also say, when doesn't problem behavior happen in the prevent part? In Mike's case, when he's doing something on his own with the aid, adult one-on-one attention, rarely does he scream. He also doesn't scream when he goes to physical education, when he does art, when he goes to music, which we call sometimes the special classes, which are, not really academic classes in some ways, but they seem to be more preferred to him, and so he doesn't scream there. The second part is, what else could Mike learn that would prevent screaming or replace screaming besides transitioning appropriately, which we already identified, and being able to communicate? You can see a lot of these are communication, better ways of getting attention, raising his hand, sharing attention, taking turns, waiting, asking for a break, and some other things that he likes. Well, he really likes the treasure box. He likes movies. He likes to get attention. He likes helping teachers. He likes walking, going outside. So now we have a little bit more of an idea of, when does this behavior happen? What happens after the behavior? What might be the function of the behavior? And what might be reinforcing? So here is Mike's hypothesis that we finally agreed upon after we did the first intervention. So the first thing is, Mike is asked to complete non-preferred tasks in small groups, such as reading and math, when he's asked to stop a preferred one-on-one activity or transition to a non-preferred group activity, or when he's asked to fix an error. That came as the result of being told no or being told to fix something. He will scream and hit. As a result, he gets to A, delay the transition or the non-preferred activity, and B, secondarily, get attention. So that's our primary hypothesis. There's another one where teachers attending to other students, he screams and hits, that they thought was very much attention. The appropriate behavior hypothesis, in the bottom there, we have when Mike is also in these conditions, which is the when part. What do we want him to do instead of screaming and hitting? And remember, on that I burst, he's supposed to express his frustration appropriately and transition from preferred to non-preferred tasks. As a result of doing that, he's going to be able to delay or get attention. So this is trying to get the team to understand he's still going to be asked to complete non-preferred activities in transition to from something he likes to something he doesn't like, or being told to fix an error. But instead of screaming and hitting to get a delay and to get attention, we want him to instead communicate his frustration and then transition. And that's how he's going to get delays and escape from now on, and attention from now on. So how do we do this? We now have to develop the plan. And it's based on that hypothesis. Our essential components of the plan is, we, the coach, do not tell the teacher what they're supposed to do. We have a menu that I'm going to show you in a minute. The menu of interventions the teacher selects and the team selects in rank orders. What are the interventions they think would work best and be things they could do in the classroom? We then go with the top ranked interventions in each category, and then we ask the teacher, how do you want to do this intervention? The coach knows the intervention well enough to know what questions to ask the teacher, and we do a task analysis. We actually list all the steps down that the teacher will do. So for this reason, we only require there to be really 4 interventions on the plan. 1 intervention for prevent that will prevent the behavior. We want to teach the new skill, the skill we want to see him to do instead, and that's mandated. We want to reinforce that skill. The teacher gets to tell us how it's going to be taught, how it's going to be reinforced. We want to reinforce it with, at a minimum, the function. And then we want to also talk about when he does scream or hit, what are we going to do instead? And then we do the coaching and the support once we get the plan developed. So this is an example of the PTR intervention checklist for the kindergarten through 8th grade. You can see that first column are prevention interventions. There's about 8 or 9 of those. The teaching interventions are in the second column. The first one, it has 2 stars because it's required. That's the replacement behavior. We don't do a plan without a replacement behavior. They can check others to add to it if they want to, but at a minimum, we have to teach that replacement behavior. And then in reinforce, we're going to talk about how we're going to reinforce it with the function, the new behavior, and how we're going to stop reinforcing the problem behavior. And so what the team does is each person rank orders 2 to 4 interventions, except for the final column, they have to do both. And then based on the votes and what the teacher seems to be in preference of doing, we then focus on what behavior under prevention we're going to focus on and develop how we're going to teach the replacement behavior, and then how are we going to reinforce it. So the task analysis, it looks like this. So on the left, you see choices. This is an example of one of our interventions that is listed. And we don't just say, okay, provide choices of where to sit, because that may not be clear enough for the teacher exactly how to do it and what kind of tone she should use and what kind of script he or she should use. On the right, you can see that's a task analysis of the choice thing. First, we're going to say what are the choices that they're going to offer Dawn in this case, and then the steps for providing choices. You can see there's 3 steps. When are we going to provide that choice? What are we going to say to Dawn when we provide that choice? And after he makes this choice, what is the teacher going to do? To help with this, let me go back to this. Each of these interventions are described in the book in the appendix. So we have Appendix A for prevention, Appendix B for teach, and Appendix C for reinforce. In the appendix, we describe the definition. We provide information on when these interventions may be the most useful or may match the hypothesis. What are some considerations? And then steps for implementation. So if you're a coach who's not as familiar with these interventions that are on this list, the appendix will help you know what kind of questions you need to ask the teacher if the teacher selects, for example, providing choices or transition supports in the prevent one. And you're going, I'm not quite sure how to do this. You can go to the appendix and it'll give you enough information to know what to ask the teacher and to develop it. And I just give you kind of an idea of what the appendices look like here for the interventions. And they're all formatted in the same way. So just so you know, there is help there. So let's look at Mike's plan. We only have about 10 minutes. We have one more step to go through. So I'm not going to read this plan for you. I do apologize to people on the phone. Hopefully you have access to this whole recording, that you'd be able to get this information when you are available so you can see all of them. But what I want you to note here is the teachers and the 2 assistants selected these interventions. They were developed by asking the teacher, how do you want to do this? So that it's feasible and possible, and the teacher feels they have the skill to do this. So they selected for Mike an environmental support, which was really they wanted to make the visual schedule, particularly for when he transitioned from preferred to non-preferred, more clear and more transparent so he could predict what would happen. They also selected what they called a curricular modification, which is they actually, to allow him a delay of a transition, they gave him a real easy preferred task that he could do before he made the transitions. It was kind of like they built in a little extra step there, so he got allowable delay. We have a videotape of that. We just don't have time to show that one. You'll see this one. They decided they would teach Mike to say, I need to calm down. And what they did is this point, they had his voice output device. It was called a Tech Talk. And they programmed one button on the Tech Talk that he could push that says, I need to calm down. And then they programmed another button on his Tech Talk to then say what he needed or what he wanted to calm down. And the choices were he could select the tent to escape or take a break. He could select a cush ball for sensory because they wanted to cover all the bases. And they could also select talk to somebody, so for attention. And these are the steps that actually say exactly how they're going to do it. So right before the transition, they're supposed to remind him that he can use his, he can tell us with his Tech Talk that he needs to calm down. If he starts getting mad, that's what they termed it, is when he starts screaming, they call that you're getting mad. Then once the transition happened, as soon as he did a little squeal, because Mike would start his screaming almost always with a very small squeal first. If he started squealing or showing that he was going to get ready to scream, then he was supposed to go hand over hand. Remember, you're supposed to do this. Say, I need to calm down. And then if he still didn't do it, they were supposed to do hand over hand prompting. Once he expressed it, then they are supposed to say, thank you for telling me what you need to make a choice, and then release him to his choice. So if he chose the tent, he'd go to the tent for a minute. Very last step says, what do we do if he goes to the tent and never comes out of the tent? Well, we know he likes attention. So we told him, just have a lot of fun out there, have a party, and we bet he won't be able to stay in that tent for that long. What they're supposed to do if he starts screaming is redirect him to use his voice output device and tell them that he needs to calm down. And then every time he says, I need to calm down, they're going to allow him to choose what he wants and release him to this. So it really came out to be a very nice thing. Now, how did the teacher learn to do that? With just a few minutes left, I'm going to go pretty quickly over this. We coach the teacher. So once we develop the plan, we set aside about 30 minutes without the student being present, just the people who are going to implement the plan. And we go through the plan with the teacher. And this is an example of a coaching fidelity form. What we did is we took Mike's plan, we whittled it down to what are the main behaviors we might observe an adult doing if they were doing the intervention as in the way it was supposed to be. And then we just practice and role play with the teacher. We'll model first and practice and say, here's how you do this, the intervention on how to remind Mike to use his replacement behavior. Then we then have them role play where I'm the student and they are the teacher. Of course, they are the teacher. They can role play with each other. And then we give feedback. We make sure they feel comfortable doing it. We then ask, do we need to prepare Mike for this? How are we going to prepare Mike? Should we set aside some time and train him in the plan? Is there anybody else we need to train in the plan? Once we start implementing the intervention, then we go in at least once a week to provide support and see how the plan is going, because we don't want the teacher doing a plan for weeks and weeks that doesn't work. We want to be able to get to it right away and change it if necessary. So within 3 weeks, though, we have a progress monitoring meeting where we look at the data, both fidelity and the student outcome data, and make next step decisions. And so in the book, we talk a lot about what are some decisions you might want to make. And we actually give you a flow chart for depending upon if the student outcome data is great, what you're going to do next. If the student outcome data isn't great, then the next thing you're going to look at is the teacher fidelity data. If the teacher is implementing the plan correctly, but the student outcomes are not great, then you do what we did with Mike. You're going to see some of his graphs is we have to change the plan. Something's not working with our plan then because the teacher is doing it correctly. If the teacher is having a hard time with the plan, then we're going to problem solve what is the plan challenge, because it could be that maybe we thought it was feasible, but the teacher says it's just too hard to do. And that happens occasionally. Well, how can we make it easier, but maybe still have it have some effects? We may have to change the plan, or maybe we just need to practice some more. If the teacher is implementing the plan correctly, then it takes you to another, or you're going to look at the plan and problem solve what's wrong with the plan. You may even have to gather more data to get a better hypothesis. So here's Mike's I-burst data. Remember, for screaming, a 5 means a lot of screaming. A 1 means no screaming, or 0 to 2 screams. And I'm not sure if all the lines are in the same on the right spot. So if you look at the dotted line, there's one line in there that I see shouldn't be in there. That who knows how a couple of lines got in there. You can see a baseline up to the second darker dotted line. That's his screaming. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, I now remember what the first line is. Okay, so there's the up to about February 1st. You see, he's got a lot of 5s and 4s, so that means there's a lot of screaming episodes. He's having at least 7 or 8, 9 screaming episodes happening most days of the school day. Now, that first line is they did their first intervention in which they said, we think it's attention. So we want to teach him a better way to get attention. If you look there, it starts around February 1st and goes to about February 15th, February 22nd, March 1st. We don't see data looking any differently than it looked at baseline. He's still screaming a lot. So that's where we came back to the drawing board and said, we have to do something different. You're doing the plan correctly. The plan just isn't working. Now, where you see about March 12th, you see dots that are at the 1. That is when they started doing the intervention you saw on the videotape or heard on the videotape. All of a sudden, Mike's screaming is drastically decreasing. Now, if we weren't researchers, we were going to stay in there forever, we would want to see why about a week later, we're starting to see an increase to 3s and then going back down to 1s. What's happening on some of those days? Now, one of the things to tell you is that they only did the intervention during transition routines. They didn't do it across the entire day, but the eye burst rates his behaviors across the entire day. So what was happening with those 3s and those 4s, their screaming is happening, but it's happening in other routines, other situations. So the decision that we would be making if we were a team, the permanent team there is, now let's start extending. It's working during transitions. Why don't we try doing something during those times when we tell him no, or tell him to fix something, or we are leaving him alone? Let's figure out what we need to do in those situations. This is his hitting. His hitting, as you can see at the end, are almost all 1s. Hitting was a 1 was 0 to 1 time. 5s were, I think, 8 more than 8 times, more than 8 hitting episodes. So this hitting is practically gone now, which is fantastic. This is an appropriate behavior. We want to see him using when as an opportunity is present to tell people, I need to calm down. So you can see before we did the intervention, not so much. After the intervention, we got some ups and downs, but we got a lot more days where it's a fantastic day. He's using at least 40% of his opportunities, which is what's on the iBurst. And then this, for transitioning from preferred to non-preferred, they went with an escalating scale that the loudest he got to was that ear-splitting scream you could hear in the parking lot. That would have been a 1. A 5 is just a whimper or a squeal. And you can see after the intervention, they're rating him that most of the time he is now transitioning with just a whimper or a squeal and not the screaming. So that's 2 minutes over. That is the basic process. Just reviewing it. It's a 5-step with the teaming process in there. It is very teacher driven, collaborative model versus expert model. It is very standardized and manualized. So the book is a manual, basically. Everybody does the PTR process, takes the team through the meetings in the same way, but all the plans are customized. So there's individualization. It's the process that is standardized. All intervention plans include at least 3 intervention from each component. All plans are task analyzed. We provide active coaching support for the teacher, and database decision making is used for next steps. And we gave you publications that people have done, and now we have questions. So I think Kayla's going to come back on, and
Hi, guys.
Myself for until I have to answer.
Okay, so we're going to go over some questions that were submitted throughout this awesome webinar. But before we do that, I'm sorry. Don't forget that we're doing the 20% off discount code. I put it in the chat a couple times. It's edWebRI, and that is good till November 30th. And you just go to brookspublishing.com. You'll be able to use that promo code. So let's go ahead and jump into questions. All right, so one of the questions we received is, what occurs when you have one student with multiple behaviors? How would you approach a BTR plan from there?
Okay, great question. Mike actually had more than screaming and hitting. He had some of those other bossiness behaviors, getting out of his seat, We've had some students where there's 7, 8, or 9 behaviors that the team comes up with they want to see less of. What we do, though, is we say, okay, if we were able to decrease one of these behaviors, which behaviors would we get the most bang with our buck? And how we usually word it in that first step is, if one of these behaviors were be reduced, which of these behaviors, if it were gone or pretty much down to almost zero, would make everybody's day a better day? That would mean the teacher's day, the student's day, the principal's day, the other kid's day, everybody's day. And we have everybody on the team either write or circle down a behavior that's on that list. If they think if that were the behavior that were decreased, that would be the one that would probably reduce a lot of the problems. We don't neglect the other behaviors. What we do then is say, okay, so let's first focus on screaming. But we have all these other behaviors. Once we get screaming down to a level where it's showing we're making progress, one of our decisions in step 4, when we start doing progress monitoring and reviewing, might be, let's now go back. Screaming is great, but Mike is still getting out of his seat. And that hasn't decreased at all. So can we talk about that? So then we'd start the whole process with, let's address out of the seat behavior. So again, it's an ongoing process, and with most kids who have very significant problem behaviors, they do have more than one behavior, and we do often need to kind of take a step back and say, let's focus on one, because if you try globally to address every behavior, teachers can get very overwhelmed, because you might be that getting out of the seat might have different triggers and different functions. So that means it's a totally different behavior plan. The behavior plan we developed for Mike, for example, might not work at all for getting out of his seat behavior, because then that may be to access a specific object. And the trigger might be when the object is in sight. So we would have to come up with some different ideas. I hope that answered it.
Oh, no, I think it did. So let's go to the next question. Thank you for that. Can a student be a part of the team when doing these?
I love that question. Yes, we definitely encourage. Now, I do have high school versions of all of our forms because we have been working with people out in high school and middle school settings, and we do have student versions of the forms available. And basically, you can take the forms that you have in this model and just use them as interviews. So for the for the step 1, for example, the goal setting form, you could use that form with a student by asking the student, what behaviors do you want to do less of in school? And what behaviors would you rather do instead? Sometimes we also ask a lot more questions. The forms that we've developed, we have a couple of what we call quality of life questions in it to get more ideas from the student on what's happening in their life, what kind of people are important in their life, and what their dreams and goals are in life, to kind of get an idea of where they want to go and what might be some barriers for them. You can do the functional behavior assessment by interviewing the student, asking them what happens right before the behavior, what they think is happening as a result of the behavior, what they perceive is happening after the behavior. We also have a student version of picking the interventions. I wouldn't necessarily have the students sit in the team meeting, though, primarily because it's so uncomfortable for anyone. I don't know if any of you have been in a meeting or anywhere where people talk about your bad habits or something like that. It's not the most reinforcing and pleasant time to be with other people. And often when I've seen the student included in teams, people use it as a chance to kind of tell the students, scold them or lecture them. And most of our students sometimes go the opposite way. So we say, unless you think the student is very mature and can handle all of that, that it might be preferable to get their input outside of the meeting. And we have different tricks and stuff. I think I gave you my email address. If you want to ask me, how do you do this in middle and high school or upper elementary, I can definitely give you a lot more kind of tips on how we do that. But yeah, when we do include the student information, man, do we learn a lot more about the behaviors than having the adults' perceptions and observations.
Sorry, it takes me a second to unmute myself. No, I imagine that having the students' input really makes all the difference when they're able to give it. Another question we received is, could you give a typical behavior you have encountered and how the group would discuss and then decide where to go from there? So what is a basic example? I guess Mike is kind of your go-to case study.
He's our go-to case study because he's got a little bit more significant problem behaviors. We have had every kind of kid, every age kid, every disability or non-disability. We only really have typical behaviors or, general one. It could be anywhere from non-compliance, that's a big thing, but non-compliance is so broad. So we have to define, what does non-compliance look in this student? Is it an internalizing non-compliance where the student puts, like in high school, a lot of times, a recent case I did, students just kind of checked out is their term, puts their head down, puts their hoodie over their face when they're asked to do some academic work, any academic work. Often we get more disruptive non-compliance behaviors. We have other examples, other video examples. One is of a kid who just calls out. We have one for cussing. This was one that another coach that we trained did as their case, and it was a little girl who was 5 or 6 with Down syndrome, and I think she must have cussed about 50 times in an hour sometimes, and she would use the big bad words too. It was in a way it was funny, but it's not always going to be funny because after they're 6 or 7, not so funny. So it basically is, as the facilitator, the coach, what I'm doing is I'm getting from the team, what are the behaviors that the student is performing that you would want to see less of. So everybody gives input. So we'll get many behaviors. And then let's narrow those down to the behaviors that we really want to focus on to start with to reduce. So I'm not quite sure if that answered the question or not, or I might not have understood the question. But yeah, we've just had everything. We've had non-attendance, being late, and think of the older kids. Pinching, hitting, biting, yelling, screaming, cussing, internalizing. We've had picking, some self-injurious behaviors, quite a few of those. We've had some kids with anxiety. We can do some behaviors that are internalizing, the anxiety type of behaviors. We may concentrate a bit more on the setting events or what is a pattern that we see that makes kids anxious.
Okay. I believe you at least partially answered the question. I hope that is what they were looking for. Another question we received is it important to select targeted behaviors based on what you know the child can control versus what they're unable to control? What would you do differently if they cannot control it? Well,
I'm not quite sure what you mean by control. The child, through their behavior problem, is accessing some sort of outcome. Either they're trying to get away from something they don't want to do, they're trying to access something they prefer to do instead of what you're asking them to do. So in behavior analysis, our theory is that all behavior is learned, as opposed to maybe saying it's a control or lack of control. And because behavior is learned, we can reteach or have the student learn a new behavior. Now, where that question would actually come into play is when we're selecting the replacement behavior for that student. So let's take Mike as the example. If Mike was screaming, Mike could turn on and turn off those screams. His screaming meant, I don't like what you're asking me to do. I don't want to do it. I'd rather do this, or, I would rather have you come over and talk to me while I'm screaming instead of transitioning to the group where so-and-so that I'm not liking today is sitting. So what we're trying to do instead is try to figure out what we can do to give him the same outcome, but in an appropriate way. So how can we allow Mike to have a short delay without having to resort to screaming and hitting to do that? So what we would ask is, can Mike do the replacement behavior we're asking him to do? So let's say that team said, we want Mike to say break. Well, that would be impossible. Mike can't do that. Mike doesn't have language right now. So Mike, if we tried to teach him to say break, the plan would fail because Mike cannot say the word break. Instead, we have to say, how could Mike get delay without having to say break. So can we use a card? Can we use a switch? Can we use the voice output device? Can he sign break? So that's where we would ask in a way that's not exactly answering your question, but we would feel that actually, unless you have a personality disorder, which we get infrequently in schools, that most of the time all that behavior is learned and you can relearn behavior. But let's say, you are hallucinating and you're hearing voices. PTR is not meant to address a psychiatric condition. You would have to have other experts come in and other supports wrapped around to try to figure out how we can help with that condition. So PTR is best for those conditions that are primarily externalizing problem behaviors, those that you see typical of kids. And if you have more questions about that, just email me, so maybe I can get more in depth about the control issue.
Okay, and let's do one more final question. How often would you suggest that the plans are reviewed and reassessed or adjusted by the teams and parents?
Great question. Well, we suggest, which people sometimes get very nervous about, we suggest initially the team reviews the data every 3 weeks. So once the plan is implemented, you bring that team back together within 3 weeks. You review student outcome data. Is the plan working? And is it having an impact on the behavior? And if it's not, you're reviewing fidelity data to see, is the intervention actually being implemented the way it was intended? And then once you make decisions based on that, and some of the decisions you make, maybe we're going to continue the plan for another 3 weeks and see if it continues to be effective. One of the decisions you may make is what happened with Mike. We need to change the plan because it's not working. Or a decision could be made, the plan's working. We're now ready to either make this criteria for the goal harder, because we now, instead of a bad day being 9 or more screams, let's make it 5 or more screams. Let's start expecting more from Mike to get, let's have a 0 for a great day, a fantastic day. We want no screaming. Or we might say, he's doing it in this class. We're doing the intervention, especially if you're in middle high school, we're doing the intervention in English. Math needs to start doing it because they're not doing anything and we still see the behavior. So then we would want to have another meeting in 3 weeks. You can start having more time between meetings as the individualized or customized interventions are showing that they're working and you're needing, you can start fading them. The other thing is that the behavior is really a very significant behavior. So there's harm happening, either physical aggression where it's hurting people or self-injurious behavior. We really would recommend you meet more often. So if I have a team and it's self-injurious behavior where the students maybe drawing blood from their own body, I would say maybe we need to come back within a week to see if this intervention is working. Because it's really a myth that behavior interventions take 3 weeks or a certain time to work. That kind of only happens when you only are doing like when you have, I'm trying to think of the word, extinction. There we go. I know it's an E word. If the only thing you're doing is trying to extinguish the behavior, you don't have a replacement behavior or prevention behavior in place, then you have to have this extinction burst. But none of our behavior plans only have extinction. We have a prevent, we have an active teaching a new skill and reinforcing that skill. So almost all of our interventions worked in the same way Mike's did on the first day. We saw some impact already that we could then use to shape.
Okay, great. It doesn't seem like we've had any other questions added, so I'll just go through the last of our slides and close up for today. So now we're going to announce the 3 winners of today's giveaway. Our 3 winners are going to be Felina Lee from Montana, Caroline Redding from Florida, and Guadalupe Ullery, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, from Arizona. I will be contacting you shortly about sending your books out to you, so congratulations. Thank you for joining us today. And don't forget, everyone, like I said, the discount code for 20% off still works, edWebRI until November 30th. Thank you again, Dr. Iovannone, for coming in today and discussing this great topic with us. It seems like we've had a lot of receptive people and they really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, you can contact her. Her contact information is on this slide, which is available for download in our archive.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And don't forget, you're going to be able to get your CE certificate. If you're watching this live, it'll be emailed to you within the next 24 hours. And if you're joining us on demand or by telephone, you just have to take your CE quiz, which is located in our archive, and get that sent over to you. And finally, don't forget to join our community teaching all students practical strategies for inclusive classrooms. Stay up to date for upcoming webinars, resources, and other discussions we may have. Join us next month with our next edWebinar with Dr. Collins. She'll be talking to us about the 8 paths to special education teacher leadership. So that'll be November 15th at 3 p.m. So I'd like to thank everyone one last time, and I think we're going to close out.